Hello, my friends, it's Gavin Seim here, and today we are going to look at black and white, and more specifically, getting that rich, deep, three-dimensional, intense, gritty, I don't know what you call it. What do you call it? Good black and white. We're going to go into Photoshop because we can do more in Photoshop when it comes to detailed edits. I love converting black and white on the raw file directly, like I've shown you guys with my Silver 4 presets. But now I want to go into Photoshop, and we're going to start doing more with some more advanced black and white techniques. Probably have black and white masters that are your favorites, and you look at these images and they're profound and they're rich, and you're like, wow, that's amazing, and you get inspired and you go out and you take a photo and you come back and it's like, why doesn't this have it? Thinking, visualizing for black and white to start with, and the light in camera is always the foundation, because if you get it bad in camera, you can only fix in post. If you get it right in camera, you can do magic. And I'm going to show you a really good technique in Photoshop that gives you a huge amount of control over black and white. But why am I wasting time? Is that good enough for the intro? Yeah? Is it good enough, Flare? I have an image, a little bit of Lightroom processing done on this one. It's a pretty good color process. And I've brought it from the raw file out of Lightroom. I'm right here into Photoshop. First thing I'm going to do is actually run a Loomis map on it. Now, I want to emphasize that if I'm using actions or anything like that, obviously I make these, I sell these, and it's how it keeps the channel going. But nothing I'm going to show you today is, in that sense, is essential for the technique I'm going to be showing you. I'm going to show you how to use gradient maps and curve layers to really control, to really maximize your tone value and use all your zones and get those rich, deep blacks, kind of that street, gritty level, beautiful street portrait kind of black and white. If you look at this photo, that I have a pretty good range. Here's a zone scale, and this is the live map that represents the zone scales. So if I were to make a curves layer and adjust something, for example, this would change in real time. You can see it going into clipping, pure clipping. You can see me going dark. And so this allows me, I really like Loomis for this reason, because I can see in real time. And all I'm going to do to start this off, and then I'm going to show you the main black and white technique, is I have quite a bit up here in zone 8. I'm going to tone down my zone 8s just a little bit. I'm going to select zone 8s. I'm going to feather, and then I'm just going to click the darken curve, which will automatically take that selection and darken those zones down a bit. Let's go straight into the technique. The black and white filter, guys, in Photoshop is good. The black and white conversions in Lightroom are good. But one of my favorite ways to do a really rich black and white lately is just put a gradient map layer. Now, I just added this adjustment layer right down here. So I put a gradient map right here, and I added it. And everything's great, except it's green, and it's weird, and that's because my gradient's wrong. So I'm going to click here. Let me zoom out again. And I'm going to go up here where you see the gradient. And I'm going to click the gradient, and it's going to open my gradient editor box. Okay, and I'm just going to go to Basics and take a black to white gradient. And boom, we're in black and white. Now, what is this doing exactly? Well, it's mapping our colors to black and white. And you might say, well, what's the point of that? I can use the black and white filter, and I can use my channels and all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to show you something really cool. Now that I have the gradient filter, anything I do underneath that gradient filter, which sits on top, the gradient filter is going to map to black and white. So I have this super non-destructive black and white process. And what that means is as I add layers, so let me go down to adjustment layers, and let's add a hue saturation layer. And let's say I want to affect the yellows. This is a normal hue saturation layer, but it's below my gradient map. So I can just change this around, and I can say, let's control the light and darkness of the yellows, right, to affect the skin tones a little bit. And of course, I can control those ranges and make them more orange or more red or whatever I want here. Let's go to my greens and darken the greens. So now I'm actually doing the same thing that I can do with the black and white filter, but I'm doing it with color, and then my gradient map here on top is converting that to black and white. So I just love the control of this, but I'm not done yet. If I go to the master channel and increase the saturation, everything I've done to the color channels is going to be increased. So rather than having to go back into each color channel, I can now control the overall intensity of an effect by turning up or down the saturation which is affecting how much each of the changes I've made to the individual channels is then converted into black and white. So if I turn this up, let's turn the gradient map off for a second. And you can see that I have a very highly saturated image. I've been tweaking with the colors, and it's all still there, all right? I've got an image. I've got channel control now. Now let's go. This curve I use to darken my highlights a little bit, but I'm going to do a global curve now. I'm going to go down to here, 2 adjustment layers. Now we're going to start bringing in kind of rich, deep black and white. And this is where not being afraid of your blacks and whites. Normally I don't want to clip my whites, but sometimes a little clipping on those blacks is fine. I'm going to darken my blacks, but not too much. So you can see I'm doing a little S curve here, but then I'm going to lift it on the bottom. Okay, so I'm actually going to pull it up. I can either go a curve like this, or I can just push the entire point up like this. And you can see if you look at my curve, that I'm actually lifting that up and eliminating those blacks. But I like this method pretty well. What I'm doing is lifting the ultra deep shadows, dropping the shadows, lifting the mids and the highlights a little bit, and darkening, bringing down the intense highlights. And I can do that as much as I want to make it more of a lo-fi look or more of an intense look, depending on what I'm going for. Okay, so in this case, I don't want to lose all my highlights. I want to keep a good tonal range. And look what we've done right here. Okay, so if I turn off my gradient map, I still have a color image underneath. I turn on my gradient map, I have this pretty cool looking base image. Now, what I want to do, I'm going to show my Loomis map just for the sake of it right now. And you can see that I've pushed back into zone 8 a little bit, but with a bit more natural gradations across the image. And I have a lot down in the zone 1 and zone 0 range, which means what? It means I have really rich blacks. And rich blacks, I'm not saying you always use them, but if you think about your favorite black and white photographers, most of them use rich blacks, but we've combined that with that little bit of curve lift, which gives us a very nice kind of filmic type of look. It looks pretty good, but I still feel like we need more. Now I want to give it a little more of that street look. I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to take and I'm going to copy the background layer. So I'm just going to drag it down to the plus icon and make a copy so I can work on that. What I'm going to do to the background layer is I'm going to show you 2 things. Now I'm going to make a new layer above the background layer. I'm going to go to fill, edit and fill, and I'm just going to fill this with 50% gray. And then I'm going to switch the mode to overlay. What this allows me to do is now go to filter and noise, or wherever I want to add noise. I'm actually going to go to filter and camera raw. This is one that people don't use as much because camera raw is really well integrated into Photoshop now. So I'm going to go into camera raw, and I'm going to go and expand the effects box and the grain, and I'm going to put some grain on here. I'm going to make it a little big and a little bit rough, like this. And I'm just going to apply that right here, and you can see that I put a nice grain. So now we're getting a more filmic look on this image. And if I really want to push this, now I can do things on my background copy like, and I will do this sometimes because our lenses are so sharp, and sometimes you want that more gritty street look, maybe not for a portrait like this, but what you can do is put a tiny bit of blur. And in this case, I'm going to put a little bit of motion blur. And I mean a little bit, like 3. So what I'm doing here is by doing a little bit of softening, I'm just giving a little bit more grittiness to the image. And if I want to, I can add a mask right down here at the bottom. I can add the mask icon right there. Black conceals, white reveals. Let me get a brush here. I'm going to paint my mask. Thank you, everyone. And you can see I'm bringing some detail back into the eyes and the lips here and the hair just a little bit, while allowing for that kind of street grittiness to come out in the rest of the image. I have my grain layer. I'm not even naming these layers. I'm just showing you guys what I'm doing. And if you look here, again, everything's being mapped to this gradient map. So I can do all of this. I can do all my work. It's all been non-destructive. And at the end, I can go here, turn the gradient map. There's some other tricks you can do with the blending modes of the gradient map as well. But let's actually look at what we've done from start to finish. I'm going to go to my history, and let's just zoom up here. Here is the color image that we started with, and here's our nice black and white. And we have all of this control, really nice, and you can tweak with it to your heart's content. But I think this looks pretty good. I think our little bit of use of blurring I think our little bit of use of lifted tones, and I think combining that all under the gradient map with just the hue saturation layer, it gives so much control in your black and white conversions. It makes it easy. So go and play with that gradient map and just put some layers underneath it and start playing around. You can play around with blending modes. You can play around with blurs. You can do all kinds of stuff that you can't do in a Lightroom style edit, because it's basically just one layer deep editing the raw file. And that's why sometimes it is better to take your image and go into something like Photoshop. If you're really trying to do like an art black and white, you really want to get a certain look, and there's so much we can do with this. And I'm going to be bringing you guys more of this stuff on working with black and white in Photoshop, because we're getting really good with our techniques and our tools in Lightroom and Capture One for these kind of conversions. And I want to go further with you guys on black and white. If you enjoy these kind of videos and you want to see more on black and white, let me know. Give me a thumbs up if you like it, a thumbs down if you don't, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. All right, you guys, take care and have a good one. Peace.